Welcome to our board members, the Chief Constable, and those who are joining us live on live stream this afternoon for our policing board member. The board, some are in the room and some are coming in by Zoom online. We welcome our new political member, Maurice Bradley, to his first public meeting of the board, and put on record our thanks to Mervyn Story for his contributions over the last number of years, and also wish to thank Sean Lynch, who has stepped down as an MLA today and is also left, I should say, the board. Chief Constable, we have received your report, which covers a range of issues. Of particular focus today is the policing approach over the next few weeks and the attempts to encourage all those with influence to make sure that events pass off peacefully. Your report also covers today issues around recruitment and representation. This is something which we've been examining through committees across all parts of the police service, officers and staff alike, as we look forward to composition and building representation over the next 5 to 10 years. We will first of all take your opening remarks and then we'll come to questions. And I suppose I should say congratulations on 2 years today. Good to have you with us. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. I won't say too much today because there's quite a fulsome report in front of you, which I commend for observations. It describes the financial outlook, which is ever present, obviously, the continuing fight against organised crime, which Mark is doing to his teams, and we thought a particular emphasis this time on the work of the neighbourhood policing teams across the country, given the investment we've seen in them, and also how important is we see to crime prevention, problem solving and good community relations. We want to do more though, and that we work over the next few months to look at where we're going in the next couple of years, the sort of vision, if you like, for neighbourhood policing, trying to define some hallmarks so that the look and feel is broadly consistent across the country, but allowing for variation to take into account different communities and different contexts, and also to try and bring all the training for those officers in neighbourhood policing teams under the banner of what we're assuming at the moment is akin to a neighbourhood policing faculty at the college, which is work that Pamela will lead on. Clearly, the issue at the moment, as you say, Chair, is that the tempo of policing remains high. We've got the Somme parades tonight, so we are sort of leaning into a busy few weeks, given the sort of issue of bonfires and parades that we're going to have to police. But I have to say that alongside parades I've seen myself and the work that Alan and John Roberts and the team have been doing, we have good plans in place, and what we've seen hitherto has largely passed off well and without incident. I myself met all the loyal orders last Friday to listen to some of their frustrations, it has to be said, but also ideas and concerns, and I thought that was a really constructive and positive meeting, both for dealing with the here and now and also relationships going forward, whilst we're still trying to wrestle with allowing people to celebrate culture or indeed another context to protest, but also mindful that there's still a pandemic and infection levels are rising. We've got the issue of bonfires to look at over the next few weeks as well. There's a lot of work again going on in the partnership space across the country, which Alan is front and centre of. There are some more contentious issues that we're trying to resolve with the cross-ministerial steering group and actually use all the tools and experience of the recent MOU and also the experience of last year to try and get remedies to these that are acceptable to all communities. The pace of events has been relentless, but I think one of the things we want to say is, looking back, our intention to try and resolve the extant issue of the fixed penalty notices for those people that were issued them in the Black Lives Matter protests. This has been a long run issue, just over 12 months, as you're aware. It's been complex in a legal sense. Clearly, there's been commentary from yourselves, the Ombudsman, and the Public Prosecution Service, all sort of making sort of suggestions about where we got things right and wrong. There's a fairness issue that underpins the situation that we find ourselves in now in terms of procedural fairness and procedural justice. So working through Mark and the team, we want to see a remedy to those people that have been issued penalty notices and paid them and having their records expunged. We're taking extensive legal advice and working with the Department of Justice to try and bring that to a swift conclusion, working within the auspices of what the court service can do as well. I'd sort of acknowledge at the moment another key contemporary issue this week is the continued issue in the investigation to the tragic death of Noah Donoghue. We continue to support the coroner in that investigation and recognise the anguish that Fiona is going through. I've met her myself a few months ago to listen to some of her concerns, and we're keen to remedy any of the issues that she's raising in terms of sort of gaps in the inquiry. But we're confident that we are making progress in the investigation. I think the other issue to bring today is to sort of highlight that at the end of the summer period, when you get together again, we'll be making some temporary command changes because 2 colleagues will be going on the strategic command course, but to reassure you that plans are in place, that there is continuity and experience in the senior command as they take advantage of additional training, and we look forward to selection of new posts probably in early 2022 with the board. And I think that's enough for now, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Chief Constable. We will move straight into questions and start with indeed the summer activities that you have referred to. I'm going to ask Gerry Kelly to speak first, potentially with supplementaries from John Blair and Dolores Kelly, but Gerry first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief Constable. You did speak earlier on about the summer and about bonfires, protests and parades, and I wanted to bring it down to maybe a specific example of it, and it's around the Adam Street interface. That's where Duncairn Gardens and the New Lodge Road. There's been a bonfire been there for now some weeks. Some of the action carried was it's been used, the platform has been used to hit golf balls in, breaking windows and damaging cars. Thankfully, it hasn't hit anybody yet. And the worry around there is that from previous experiences that the clock has been run down and that this bonfire will take part. Now, different communities, and you've spoke about this, have different views of bonfires. The problem with this one is very specific. It has been shifted in the last couple of years deliberately to the interface to have an effect not on Tigers Bay, but on the New Lodge. And it is having an effect, and there's up till a couple of nights ago, there was still actions being taken, there's petrol bombs have been thrown, etc. So really what the people of the New Lodge and Duncairn, and I would guess that to an extent within Tigers Bay, is, what are you going to do? Is there a guarantee that this bonfire will not go ahead at its present site, at least, and so that people will have the quiet summer that everybody wants? Because in the past, and that is the worry, that the police are running down the clock. We know that there are contractors in place. We know that the council is ready to assist. We know that there's an MOU, as you spoke yourself, between 3 different departments. But what the people need is a guarantee that action will be taken.
Thanks, Gerry. We're acutely conscious that probably that this is the most contentious of the bonfire issues that we're dealing with at the moment. We continue to work with the sort of ministerial departments that have ownership of the land, which is the first point of resolution to this, if you like. As you well know, we're just here to facilitate any removal of the bonfire by a contractor, not to get involved in doing it ourselves. We just need to support others. Alan is involved in quite a lot of work about this. Indeed, we've got meetings this afternoon once we finish here as a senior team to look at the options open to us. But I don't know whether you want to update on the current situation in that space.
Not specifically at this moment, Chief. Given that it sits in an operational sphere, I'm reluctant to talk about the fine detail around it. What I would say is that I think the wider context is important. There are over 250 bonfires across Northern Ireland. I think we're probably looking at 2 or 3 sites of concern, and I think that context is important. Equally, across all of those sites for concern, we work with the people who own the land and the people who have an interest and the local communities. And the work around a community resolution to this has continued up until as recently as yesterday. And I'll be getting a readout from those meetings and talking to my own team and our partners today and the rest of this week as we plan for what may or may not be required and how we best support it. But at this stage, I wouldn't want to comment any further.
Dragon back in, Chair, and thank you for that. But just let me make this point. I mean, there are three departments involved in this. There's a council involved in it. My understanding is that they're all agreed that if the bonfire shifted from one piece of land, which might be the Department of Infrastructure, the Department of Communities, or the DOJ, who have some control in there, that all three departments are for allowing the contractors in, as is the Belfast City Council. So my worry is that the police will be there to allow that to happen. That's the point I'm making.
That's fully understood. And maybe without wanting to push back too strongly, I wouldn't want anybody going away from this conversation thinking that the police were, to use the phrase, running down the clock. There's due process to be followed. Community meetings were continuing up until yesterday. Other people have responsibilities in this space, and we'll be continuing to work with them.
Thank you. John, I think you want to add to this around the summer activity. John Blair.
Gerry, and I thank the Chief Constable for his report today. In relation to events of the next few weeks, I have to say I recognise the efforts of the loyal orders to steer away from large scale events in the COVID risk circumstances. But I want to ask, nevertheless, what the resource implications are from a larger number of parades, albeit that those parades will be smaller and more localised in nature, and also if there's likely to be an impact on neighbourhood policing through this planning process.
Thanks, John. Again, I'll bring Alan in to do the detail because he's wrestling with this issue. Clearly, there are resource implications, but actually part of the issue for neighbourhood policing is to be part of the solution. So where there are sort of small local parades, you'd expect to see the local neighbourhood team there very much part of the policing operation. But Alan can give you some sense of the breadth of what we're dealing with, particularly on the 12th in relation to planning assumptions and resourcing.
Thanks, Chief, and thanks, John. I too welcome the positive engagement through many stakeholders, including the position taken by the loyal orders about not having large district-based events this year, which avoids large groups of people and large gatherings in what is still a rising infection rate in a pandemic. And the alternative to that is a much higher number of local events. And you're right, that the spread of that at somewhere close to 100 events needs to be policed, and we will in many cases lead the policing of those with neighbourhood policing teams because they have the local contact, they have the local engagement. We think that's the best way to achieve a positive outcome in that space. It's always a busy time of year, with the bonfires potentially being split on different sites over 2 nights, on the 10th and the 11th, given that it falls on a weekend. With the 12th falling on Monday, it will be a time when police resources are under pressure. But the nature of that this year will be slightly different, but the pressure is nonetheless. But we do have plans in place to make sure that that goes off safely. We're working with a whole range of people on positive engagement across these people, across these events. I welcome the people working with us. I welcome that engagement. I welcome the positive attitude and look forward to getting positive outcomes with them.
Okay, thank you. Dolores, do you want to come back in on that? If not, I know you want to ask about recruitment, so either or both of those, yeah.
Well, just very briefly, Claire, because we have heard how engage and consult are two of the main themes emerging in relation to the police's dialogue with the Orange Order, and I do recognise the responsible leadership they've given during the COVID pandemic, but unfortunately many aren't liaising with local communities, and police, at least at local level, if not at senior level, will know that there are a number of parades being applied for that were deemed not to be contentious but are now sensitive. And also the flags issue. I mean, there seems to be a huge proliferation of flags which have gone up in shared housing estates in areas where nobody was engaged with, nobody was consulted, and are what I can see along parade routes that have now been applied for. And there's huge uproar in communities where there have been previous good community relations. And I just want to ask, that you would relay those concerns to the Orange Order leadership in your conversations with them later, that the principle of engagement and consultation, which they seek to have applied to them, they're not applying to the communities through which they're putting the flags up or wish to parade. And that's most regrettable, Chair. And I just wonder, there were protocols around flags and there were protocols around bonfires. Have they all gone by the wayside this year?
Alan, do you want to update? Because I know, again, you're doing a lot of work on that. It's probably easier.
Thanks, Dolores. I'm aware of some local tensions in a small number of cases. I do think it's important, again, for the context, that the vast majority of those events are non-contentious, non-sensitive, and we work with partners on those that are or have the potential to be to pass off peacefully and with the minimum of community tension arising. In terms of protocols, the protocols are the internal PSNI protocol on flags remains in place. Of course, the work of FICT, which has been sitting for some time in the Executive Office, we would look forward to that contributing to this space, because we as an agency on our own continue not to have all the answers in this space, and we'll need a wider solution going forward. And certainly the protocol which then moved into the MOU with partners in relation to bonfires this year is very much in play and very much forms a part of the centre of our current approach. So we'll be developing that over the next week or 10 days.
Okay, thank you. We're going to look at recruitment now, and Joanne, I believe, has a question in this, and then I'll come to Colm and Dolores, but Joanne first.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Chief Constable, I note in your report you state we will continue to focus on outreach with working class communities. The evidence base identifies that, and this is in bold, the primary issue facing police recruitment is one of community background rather than socio-economic class background. I suppose my issue is, how do we know? Is it measured? Because prior to that campaign, the DUP asked for statistics and asked for a drill down, and we never got that information. We said, I mean, we've been going on about this for a long time, and around all of these issues, we said we wanted action. You said you would move beyond words to action, and we are expecting and waiting for delivery. Now, it just seems to me that, again, the narrative of the report, the focus seems to be on community background, which is diplomacy for the Roman Catholic community, when you know that there's a massive issue in the working class Protestant community. So on that basis, are you avoiding gathering the evidence that this community is underrepresented? What work is being done to ascertain why young loyalists will join the army and not the police? What is being done to stop the PSNI becoming a cold house for the people that I represent? And what work is being done to ascertain the impact that threats from Republicans have on recruitment for the Roman Catholic community?
Well, there's a few things there, Joanne, so thanks. I think the biggest issue, and it reflects the recent conversations we've had, and indeed I've had with wider people from the PO community, frankly, after various criticisms. The challenge of word and deed has been sort of the underpinning sort of theme of this, really. And when we came away and looked, there are figures that we can get to separately would tend to suggest that some of the assumptions that we're making aren't entirely borne through by those facts. So that's something that I'm sure Pamela can do at a relevant committee, if we haven't briefed already. We are determined in the campaign that's coming. Clearly, there is huge ambition around numbers. It'll be a big campaign this year to bring in the uplift to get it to 7,100. We do want to learn the lessons of outreach from last time, but which we've reported onto the board, but had a meeting ourselves only about 10 days ago with both the advertising agency and the provider about bringing more edge to the advertising, and also looking deliberately where we could target recruitment, so that as far as we are able, with the sort of tools that we've got, we can try and influence recruitment from across all of the underrepresented communities, frankly. There are clearly broader issues systemically about people choosing or not to join the police service. Some may be economic, around the environment at the time in terms of jobs. Some are the threat level, and that applies to people coming from all communities in terms of how safe they and their families feel it is to join the police service. And some, despite the changes that we've made to things like educational attainment are about life chances and broader long-term things that is way beyond the control of policing, are really the gift of the executive and how social policy affects roots into this part of public service. But do you want to sort of give any other highlights, Pamela, to the work you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, no, happy to pick up on that. We've some of the statistics that we've shared with Resource Committee around the socioeconomic touches on the multiple deprivation measures. So I think that's the basis on which Chief Constable's report refers to. It's not socioeconomic as much as community background. So that's the basis for that. I'm happy to share that further with you, Joanne, as well. We touched on it with regards to the measures that we're looking at with regards to barriers to recruitment, and again, happy to engage with committees and others around what your sense of that is at a local level, and consider that. We will continue the outreach between now and the autumn, into the autumn campaign. Right across the work with community safety departments undertaken with regards to engagement across the organisation. So build into that. It's not a separate thing, it's part of it. And further engagement that we would do ourselves and with the independent advisory groups. I do think we've been looking at alternatives to some of our recruitment processes and how we can facilitate those approaching the process. And Simon's referred to some of that, just around visibility and making it a bit more localised as well. So it's not just an NI campaign, that we get aspects of a local approach to that as well. So we'd be looking at a number of those as to what we are starting to derive, some of those barriers that would be perceived to recruitment, and what measures we can take between now and the autumn to take steps to improve that.
Thank you. I'm going to flip slightly. I was going to come to Colm and then Dolores. I'm going to let Dolores in first because Colm's is to do with financing of it. So Dolores.
Well, Chair, the figures speak for themselves. The community representation from the Catholic community is, while slightly increased this year, is on a downward trend and continues. We're no further forward over the past number of years, and sitting in around the 30 to 31% means that an awful lot more needs to be done. The SDLP are long on record as calling for a 50-50 to be re-established. It's our belief that much more needs to be done, and I think it's not enough. We need to look internally within the police, because police staff figures are actually much worse in terms of community background statistics. Why people from the Catholic nationalist community aren't joining the police, and I accept the barriers around threats from dissidents, around the impact that legacy has on confidence and on families in terms of their perception of policing. I don't think police have got the credit for the transition that they made over the past 20 years. I think they've done an enormous good job, but the challenge remains, and I think internally there has to be a much more radical approach in looking at both structural and any perceived discrimination or indiscriminate practices subconsciously or otherwise that pertain as to why we're not seeing improvements. These figures are starting very much at a standstill, and indeed are at risk of a much sharp downward trend over the next 5 to 7 years.
Clearly, the issues you raised, Dolores, we accept that one of the big worries that if things just remain the same, you will see a deterioration, it's likely, in our planning assumptions in the number of Catholic officers in the workforce, which is completely contrary to the direction of travel we want to see. And I think also acknowledging that I think it's the definition of insanity, isn't it, about doing the same things and expecting different results. So we are conscious about how we're innovative and how we're tailoring, as Pamela said, specific bits of the campaign to target different parts of the demographic we're trying to attract. There are other things on the horizon that to try, part of the underpinning, for example, a lot of changes you may have seen even recently in social media space is short burst films. You've seen it this month on the work of the Operational Support Department and the Territorial Support Group to try and show more to potential applicants about the type of work that policing is engaged in. And things like a fly on the wall documentary are also part of the planning in the months ahead, because when you look at other places, that usually sees an uptake in recruitment. Let's remember from the figures, actually the last campaign attracted more people than the previous one. So we're clearly doing something right. But I think it's about bearing in mind comments you've made, as well as Joanne's, is about how we can continue to tailor specifics to try and attract the broadest sort of group of people into the organisation, but also reminded you've touched on one of a number of the more structural things and the advocacy role that colleagues on the board can take to encourage people both personally and politically to join the police service.
Thank you. We take our role seriously in terms of advocating, and you're quite right. We all need to be playing our part in that. Dolores, sorry, you wanted to come back there?
Well, Chair, yes, because I've made the comment to the Chief Constable and to previous Chief Constables in relation to the development of officers who do actually get in amongst the ranks. We're not seeing at a senior level enough diversity, both in terms of female and indeed a community background. And I think that's a further challenge in terms of the internal training and employment and career development opportunities. And I hope that that is a priority for the Chief Constable in the year ahead.
Yeah, I think agreed, Dolores. Part of it starts right at the top with selection processes that come through here. And also we will recruit heavily, certainly solely not just on the police officer side, but police staff side in senior roles. And we're determined to encourage all that we can internally to promote people from a range of different backgrounds into middle ranking and senior roles. So we've got quite ambitious plans in the next few months, for example, at superintendent and chief superintendent ranks. And I've been quite determined to encourage people to apply so that we can see a shift in those demographics, because we agree with you.
Okay, thank you. Colm has a question now with regard to the finances around recruitment, and then I'm going to come to Michael for his question after that. Colm.
Chair, thank you. And Simon, thank you for the report. My question is around finance, and we've done very well this year in getting the finance from one or two different sources to sort of cover the deficit and to allow us to get to the 7,100 numbers. I am conscious that that's a one-year settlement from a few different sources and therefore not guaranteed going forward. So I suppose my question is around the challenges you face in maintaining those police officer numbers at 7,100, how much more is needed in 22-23 and beyond that. And I do note the delivery of the PSNI financial strategy to the Resources Committee earlier in the month. But can I just ask you to maybe bring that to life a little bit, Simon, in terms of what work has been done within longer term strategy along a number of themes, if you will. So process re-engineering, the greater use of digital by default delivery, and the extent to which we can make that work within policing. Assessing the appropriate numbers of police officers and staff is going to be required as we do engineer the processes, and the various funding sources that we can tap on, particularly looking at the possibility of revenue raising as happens in other forces across GB and doesn't happen here at the present time. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Well, I think there's an awful lot at stake there, because it's the biggest issue we actually have to wrestle with, isn't it? Because if we don't get the money in various forms in, we can't develop the organisation in whatever means. So I think I've been pleased to see the progress, obviously working closely with Pamela and others to get, even if it's at the last minute, enough money to not shrink, but to grow this year. We still remain committed to the figures in the New Deal, New Approach, the 7,500. And I think the thing, you'll have your own view as a board, because that gradually they come into committee, and we'll touch upon this a bit on the way day on Monday, about the foundations we need to enable proper and diligent financial and resource management. So we now have as you've seen, a financial strategy and a capital strategy. We have a digital strategy. We're just about to sign off on a fleet and estate ones, which will always, all taken together, start to set a direction for where we want to invest wisely and give more of a medium-term output than perhaps we've had hitherto. I think it will also put us in a better place to engage with the Department of Finance if, for example, we move to multi-year budgets, so there's more sense of, from their point of view, where we're going. We are being quite aggressive in our thinking around estate, which Pamela obviously will want to engage heavily with yourselves on as effectively the owners. And I agree with some of the sentiment there, Colm. I think, for example, the digital investment is probably crucial, both to make sure to yourselves and others that hold us to account that if we're seeing more people, the productivity rises with it. And it's not just about raw numbers and that sort of number crunching world, but actually the value and the victim care that the public sees also goes with it. If we're putting officers particularly into different roles, there can be a difference, not just the same. I do think we've seen the benefits of some of the investment over the last 12, 18 months by effectively laptops to back up middle office roles that kept the organisation going pretty much through COVID. There's been some tremendous innovation and resilience and commitment to do that. I think the game changer for this year, subject to final approvals, will be 4,000 digitised laptops to go out to frontline officers. We've been proposing in future, as you join, as much as you get your uniform, you're going to get your laptop to go with it. So from the very first engagement with the organisation, you'll get your training on the laptop. And then when you go into the field, the relationship with the public should start to change so we can capture evidence digitally or push information to you. So I agree that those are key. And also that there are perhaps some things we can think about revenue. Clearly, there's an issue, for example, with the changes only very recently to licensing legislation. We estimate there will be a cost to us in terms of pushing officers on duty later into the night. So things that we did advocate for, that like a late night levy, will be something still we'd want to work with yourselves on to see if we can get that into legislation. We want to support hospitality and the economy, but also recognise that will divert officers from other roles if we're dealing with the violence and disorder that sadly comes from late night drinking. So there are various things. I think some of the revenue that other places do generate, I know from experience, can also be as costly to generate in the first place. So we have to look at where you can be quite specific. But I think we've got high ambition and are starting to sort of make real progress. But I've probably stolen too much of Pamela's thunder to add any spaces, but is there any gaps?
Pick up on a few bits, he stole most of my thunder totally. Colm, yes, I mean, we were delighted this year to secure the funding, just over £12 million to secure the 7,100 officer posts and staff posts at just over 2,500. The full year impact of that is just shy of 24 million. And I think that was your question going into 22-23. So that is something, to be able to sustain that level, never mind increase it, that we would need going forward. I think the thing to bear in mind on the further to conversations earlier with regards to increasing the officer numbers, we have an attrition rate of police officers of approximately 300 per year. So we need to recruit 300 to stand still. And at the moment, we've 458 going through the college this year, which in a COVID environment and restricted environment will be a challenge, but we're confident we will be able to do that. So again, looking forward by way of the annual increased level of funding that's needed, you would really predicate it on an additional 100, 150 on top of your 300 that you need to do a year. So you're not going to go straight to the solution. It would be beyond challenging to be able to do that. The revenue raising is an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, with the exception of very small areas, we don't have that same level of opportunity as maybe forces and services in England would have. But honestly, I mean, I think the thing for me and for the service is to consolidate some of the funding mechanisms and streams that we've got would go a long way. And equally, the single year and 1 year budgets is not a mechanism. I mean, Simon's referred to estate transformation, digital transformation. We obviously would want to look at re-engineering how we, provide the service, looking at our operating model. But taking those decisions in year by way of transformational change is very, very challenging. I think there's a glimmer of hope in our engagement with Department of Justice and Department of Finance with an interface into Treasury that we may well be looking at a comprehensive spending review possibly by the autumn, and that would be good if we could start to advocate and get impact through those conversations. I think we'd get more from that than just purely around the revenue generating aspect of it.
Thank you for that. Next question is coming from Michael. It's to do with the proceeds of crime. I don't think there's any inclination that this provides any of the money you need for what we've just been talking, but nonetheless, over to Michael, and then we'll come from that to Liz and to Trevor. So, Michael.
Thanks, Chair, and good afternoon, Chief Constable. I must say the information on the report in the neighbourhood teams was very helpful, sort of from our perspective, so thanks for that. I wanted just to focus in firstly, legislative measures as the Chair has alluded to, and in relation to legislators' measures which act to remove the proceeds of crime, the Justice Minister has outlined earlier in June how 4 Northern Ireland codes of practice issued under the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002 and further enhanced by the Criminal Finances Act 2017 were before the Assembly for approval. These have been held up because of the Assembly's dissolution in 2017, but are due to be commenced imminently. And the question really is if the Chief Constable might update the board to the extent he considers appropriate the state of readiness within PSNI to take advantage of these new arrangements, and to the extent perhaps that he feels that they're helpful arrangements. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I'll let Mark come in from the crime side to sort of do state of readiness. I think it's worth saying we do welcome the new powers. It's the old adage in crime fighting about sometimes follow the money, and then communities see ill-gotten gains not being challenged. And obviously, in the regular inputs you've had here from the National Crime Agency, I know the debate about unexplained wealth orders has been one that's come and gone. It doesn't actually change that for us in a direct sense, but we can work better with the National Crime Agency now to get them. But we have been anticipating the change and getting ready. But I'll bring Mark in just to give a few headlines about what we're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. Thank you, Michael. And again, really welcome these coming into effect. They actually came into effect on the 20th of June, and they bring us in line with GB, with the rest of the UK, in terms of being able to seize assets. Fundamentally, what they do is they allow us to focus on the asset and seize the asset as opposed to the individual, and then having to follow that line back to the assets. So we know that this is where we have a major impact on particularly serious and organised criminality. As the Chief has explained, the National Crime Agency are still the lead for unexplained wealth orders, so we're able to now utilise that in our partnership with them straight away. And in terms of our own readiness, we have 10 financial investigator tutors who are undertaking upskilling courses at the moment. They will then be able to provide delivery. So the accreditation, training and accreditation is managed by the NCA Proceeds of Crime Centre. So we have 10 financial investigator tutors being accredited by them now, and they will then be able to deliver upskilling to 40 financial investigators in September this year. And that's a 2-day workshop where we will hopefully have all our 40 investigators trained by the end of September this year.
Thanks very much for that. I suppose maybe not a particularly easy question, but whether you see any sort of gaps in the legislative arrangements that would be particularly helpful to fill at this stage?
So at this stage, we don't see any particular gaps. As I say, this is very welcome. It has been a major gap for us for a number of years now, but this brings us into line with the rest of the UK. We do, despite the fact of not having this, we do actually seek to seize assets under other legislation, and we've been quite successful in that, including Op Chambala, which is one of the biggest money laundering operations undertaken in the UK and further afield. So it's not that this has been something that we have ignored. We do seek to seize assets using other legislation right across the board, whether we're looking at violent extremism or serious and organised crime. But this does give us significantly better ability to do that.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz, we come to your question on spit and bite hoods. Liz.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report. Chair, just before I go into the question, I suppose just very quickly, because it is coming up, is the South Armagh Policing Review. And obviously, we've been asking for some time now to see the report. And I know we're going to talk about it at the board away day on Monday, just to see when it'll be available to members. I think, it is disappointing that it's taken this long, but I do hope that we will be satisfied with what the report contains.
Yeah, thanks. Well, as you say, Liz, we will deal with this on Monday, but the report that supports it will go out this afternoon once we're back from here, basically.
Okay, no, thank you. Just in relation to my original question and around the spit and bite guards, I mean, it's my understanding that the PSNI, are we not basing the consultation on the use of spit and bite guards when you're saying that, firstly, that all officers and staff are trained, and secondly, that all uses are referred to the Ombudsman? You know, it was my understanding that the case was that some officers and staff had used the spit and bite guards that hadn't been trained beforehand, and secondly, was it not the case that the Ombudsman might not be able to review each use of spit and bite guards after this month? I mean, just to put into context, the board had said in a report last year that we thought that the use of spit and bite guards should cease. So it's just to get clarity around all of that.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Well, there's a few bits there. Firstly, you have to remember that there's been 2 tranches of training since we introduced the spit and bite guards under the COVID environment. So there was, so there have been a small number of incidents where officers have applied a spit and bite guard without being trained, and Mark can pick up on that if you want. I'd be careful what I say here in the public session, but obviously they're doing that at their own jeopardy. It'd be contrary to explicit policy and procedure guidance, so that would be referred automatically to the Ombudsman. We've been very grateful for her help actually from the outset on this issue, so we do understand it's a contentious and emotive one, so that we have been sort of using the benefit of her experience to get us and yourselves that assurance about officer behaviour and practice. And if there are any things she's concerned about, they're referred through to Mark as the deputy to see how we then address them with ourselves or indeed internally. We've still got work to finish, which John Roberts is leading on in relation to long-term decisions. We've gone through the equality impact assessment now. It's clearly a decision we know we have to bring back here, which we're aiming to do in early autumn. And the continued use is something that Mark or I review every 28 days when we take into account a range of factors. We do have to remind ourselves that we're still in a COVID environment, and despite the fact that restrictions may well be changing, that we're seeing even this week that infection rates are actually rising. So we've got to bear that in mind in the decisions we're making. But we have very clear instructions in terms of use. I think we said previously we're happy to make the training video available to members to see, because I've done it myself and I think it's quite good. It's about a 30-minute watch, and then after that officers can be issued to use it where they have to. I think the interesting thing we're also unpicking is that on the latest figures, about 2/3 of use are happening in vehicles. So we're asking ourselves some questions about the right sort of vehicles to cope with people who may be violent and intent on attacking officers, and how we may need to make changes in indeed the months and years ahead. So I don't know what you're going to say on the figures, Mark, we're up to.
Yes, through the chair, since the initial rollout last year, there have been 13 occasions of untrained application of spit and bite guard. And since January this year, these have now become automatic referrals to the Ombudsman office, following the second rollout of training and the requirement of all officers very clearly to have completed the training course before they apply a spit and bite guard.
Thanks, Chair. Just to come back on the comments there by Mark and Simon, I mean, it's good to get that information. However, still is very concerning that has happened, and I would be concerned just going forward, particularly following the Ombudsman's report that I think past this month, they won't be, it's my understanding, they wouldn't be reviewing every use of spit and bite guard. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. But thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, Liz, just to say that the Ombudsman is continuing to review for I'm not quite sure when it started, but for a further 3 months from the initial review. There are questions whether they can continue to do that beyond there, but we certainly would be expecting this trial to be concluded and the wider EQIA report, etc., to be brought back through us before then anyway. But thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to Trevor next, and then to Tom. So Trevor.
I have 2 different questions, Chair. The first one, and I mean, like Michael, I welcome the breakdown in the report in terms of each of the districts. I think that's been useful. But one of the things that's actually noticeable in this, and in given conversations that we've actually had with officers and given the year we've had with COVID, it's interesting that some of the statistics in this today in relation to drug searches or drug finds, which are welcome, but most of those have been probably April or May of this year. Is there a degree of catch-up, given that with the house searches probably been less frequent over the last 12 months? And is there any plans to step that up? Because, I mean, most of the people in the public we talk about where antisocial behaviour is connected or other issues connected within the community, people are concerned about the level of drugs. I mean, people talk about open leaking into Belfast, see people injecting themselves and other things in Belfast. So I appreciate the difficulty of the last 12 months with COVID. I congratulate the police on the work they've done in relation to the report today and some of those figures. But at what stage is the real catch-up going to start?
Thanks, Trevor. I'm glad you like the format, because it's something we're trying to bring every 3 months or so to give you some sense of where one part of policing is working. Actually, when you look at the crime figures, they will show that crime is rising, but one of the reasons it is because of our operational activity, because drug searches are actually included in the crime figures, so that they have actually gone up. So despite COVID, we can get the specific details, because I think they're in some of the crime figures when the last update to the board, that we haven't sort of stopped despite the COVID environment, because we will just follow the sort of the crime wave. We know that drug misuse is one of the key public concerns, because of its either visible effects in communities or indeed its physical effects, and the stuff we've just been talking about the wealth it will generate to organised crime. We've seen real success this year, without being complacent, to the work that Mark will report, and it's again in the report, about significant seizures of drugs trying to be trafficked and imported into the country. But also we recognise that at local level, we need to be able to go for the door of a local dealer or dismantle a cannabis farm, whatever that people will report to us. I've had recent meetings with Crime Stoppers where we've been looking at how we can sort of speed up responses to that sort of information and tailor campaigns. And indeed, Mark and the team are about to launch a new campaign specifically targeting drug dealing. So I'll just bring Mark in to sort of sweep up behind some of the specifics, but we are determined to keep up the pressure, Trevor.
Yeah, I think as the Chief has said, Chair, we continue the momentum of those seizures. We continue particularly through PCTF targeting serious and organised crime, and we don't go very far into that where we start to see importation and the tentacles, as we talked about at the last board meeting, heading across boundaries and across borders, and working with the NCA on that, right down to the local level. We're also very concerned around the sale and misuse of prescription drugs, which tends to be a more localised issue, and we are working to combat that as well. We see a lot of our drugs deaths related to that, so that's a growing issue for us. In terms of the suppression effect of COVID, it did have a suppressive effect on the drugs trade and drug supply, both into Northern Ireland and within Northern Ireland. We saw some groupings attempt to get around that, particularly using cyber-enabled methodology. But like a lot of other elements of criminality, we're starting to see that grow again as restrictions ease and as people come back to normal, along with other types of crime where we're seeing some increases now. So we will continue with the momentum that we've got, and working very closely with partners, not just with the likes of the NCA, but also with UK Border Force and HMRC and partners such as that, particularly looking at where criminal networks have infiltrated hauliers and that type of movement of drugs. We continue to target that.
Okay, thank you. Chief, my second question, I have to say I'm quite alarmed reading that newspaper article this morning. PSNI officers told not to stop, find or arrest members of a political group from Londonderry, English translation, Liberation. For me, if this is true, that's very disturbing. That, I mean, the work that you have been doing to try and to disrupt and break up some of the activities between that group and many other groups, regardless of what backgrounds they're from, is very alarming. Where's that instruction coming from? And are you heeding that instruction? And if you are heeding that instruction, what message does that give out to the rest of the members of the public? And given back to what we've heard quite frequently, and you've heard quite frequently, two-tier policing.
I've not got the detail on that, Trevor. I've not seen that myself this morning. I don't know if Alan knows anything about it. We'll have to come back to you.
Trevor, I'm not aware of what the report says. What I can tell you is that neither I, the commander, or any senior team from Derry City and Strabane have had that conversation or issued that direction.
Well, just come back to that then. So I'll take that at face value. However, I know you are very active on social media. I see you've been tagged in it on social media. So I do find it difficult to understand that this is the first you've seen this. I noticed this during the interval. I have to say I'm very alarmed if it's true, because I think the work that you've been doing, and I mean, our party have been very supportive of stop and search powers, because we think this is one of the mechanisms that you can use to disrupt criminal activity. This organisation has been linked to, obviously, the unfortunate death of Blair McKee. And I think if there's any shred of truth in this, I think it's very alarming, and I think you should be coming back to the board to update us on that.
Yeah, I can assure you, Trevor, whilst I might have a presence on social media, I don't spend in a nice way the entire day on the phone, so I generally haven't seen it. It's the first I've heard about it. Rather than just give half an answer here, we can update pretty quickly, certainly by Monday. Clearly, Alan's view is quite clear that locally there's been no instruction, so quite what is behind this, we'll just have to take a look at and come back to you on Monday when we see you.
Well, we await that response. Thank you, Simon. Okay, Tom Frawley, question now with regard to the ICO report on mobile phones, and then a secondary question from Michael, and that I think then covers all of the questions within public and private session. If anyone has a burning additional question, then please do indicate or text the Chief Executive, and we'll make sure that it's added in before we conclude. But Tom Frawley up next.
Yeah, Chair, I appreciate the answers and detail that's been offered us in relation to the questions today, but this is a report just published the day before yesterday, which clearly refers to a report by the Information Commissioner's Office in relation to data extraction from the telephones of suspects and in some cases witnesses as well. And some of the language of the report is very sort of concerning around issues like excessive activity in terms of withdrawing information or extracting information, and a lack of control over that. And I suppose I will look forward to more detailed debate. But one of the findings that's very much concerning to me, at any rate, is that we haven't even sought accreditation for our current approach from the relevant standards agencies. And I wondered why, was that an oversight, or did we feel we didn't have sufficiently developed our arrangement to seek that accreditation? Because it seems fairly basic in the terms of it's an ISO/IEC international laboratory standard, and yet we're taking this information from the phones of citizens.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It is a wide-ranging report, and I think I'd like to place on record my thanks to the Information Commissioner about the way she's gone about it. You'll see, putting it in context, Tom, this originally would have been a whole UK report into the use of this particular tactic, but COVID actually inhibited that. So there was a narrative last year for England and Wales, which is broadly the same as we have seen. We first engaged with this in last November, and you'll see in the forward, I think, again, the Information Commissioner praises the work of John Robertson and the team that have been working on this, about our willingness to engage, the candour and the efforts we're making to remedy this. It's, I think, a classic example, and she again makes reference to this in the report and a blog she's published about the issue between police tactics keeping pace with technology and indeed legislation, because some of the issues are about overarching legislation, which are a matter for government, as well as police policy and practice. But we recognise that the heart of this is to try and mitigate against a public belief that we're on fishing expeditions, and that when we are seizing phones, which is quite legitimate, that we're using that evidence in a way that's necessary and proportionate to investigation. So the underpinning issue here for us is that rather than going out on a limb, we need to work in tandem with the College of Policing in GB, and also the National Police Chiefs Council, so that our practice and policy frameworks are consistent. I can double check, Tom, but my understanding is the ISO accreditation is not that we haven't done it. we have been doing it. It's just not finished, but I will double check that. You may have seen something that I've missed. But clearly, as a package, there are issues for us. But I would point you to similar issues over the last decade where policing has faced similar issues, for example, around facial recognition and automatic number plate recognition, where the introduction of technology has not always kept pace with the legislative and policy framework. So we want to remedy this. Some of it we can do quite quickly in terms of immediacy around practice and policy, and some potential technological fixes. But obviously legislative change may take a while longer while we catch up. So we will report this back in the autumn about where we are on a more specific action plan, because as you say, we've had 2 days, I think, to receive the report and start to see its implications.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a battery running low. I hope someone's got a plug in, otherwise you may miss the last bit of the meeting anyway. Michael, next question, please.
Thanks, Chair. Chief Constable, HMICFRS published a review on policing of domestic abuse. This was published on the 23rd of June of this year. It's a report that's been carried out on a UK-wide basis during the pandemic, and it contains 3 broad areas of recommendations designed to protect victims. Broadly, these relate to the use of online reporting and telephone contact, the safeguarding of victims whose case is awaiting trial at court, and also addressing the relatively high percentage of cases that are not pursued because victims feel unable to support police action. Now, appreciating it is done on a UK-wide basis, but clearly may have relevance here. I just wondered whether the Chief Constable could update us on his views on that, the content of the report, and the extent to which PSNI feels they're placed to take on board any of the recommendations contained within it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Well, I think firstly, the actual report itself, we haven't taken through, if you like, internal governance to see, if you like, a gap assessment of what they're saying and to where we are. But I think in terms of reassurance, we do have an online reporting capacity now, but also bigger plans towards the end of the year to sort of offer far more access to policing through new internet, with that web chat online or social media. I think the key thing, and we can bring some detail, and I think we reported on this here in the past, but one of the things certainly we've pushed in the last 12, 18 months is about improving outcome rates for some particular parts of the domestic abuse problem. So I've always said, for example, in domestic violence with injury, it's the one crime where we know who did it. So why can't we be better at resolving that for victims? Because clearly there's physical evidence of an injury, whereas in some other crimes, it can be one word against another, so it's harder to prove. We did some really interesting work where we broke down the reasons why victims didn't pursue investigations, which if we haven't done already, we can share with yourselves through probably, I guess, the partnership committee. Some senses you might say it's a bit motherhood and apple pie, but underneath there are themes that we can tailor to victim support services. I have to say as well, clearly one of the issues for victims generally is that despite best efforts, it can still take a long time to get into court, to get resolution. So that ends up with other issues around the management of bail, or just keeping victims with us over what sometimes can still take years if it's a not guilty plea. So clearly the swifter justice is, that supports victims as well. But it remains a key priority for us and for the work that Anthony Manana is doing with the Public Protection Branch. But we can bring a formal reply to committee once we've had a chance to assess internally the recommendations, but it remains a key priority for us.
Thank you very much. I'm notified of one, it says small question, so I take it very short. Gerry, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you for letting me back in, and I will keep it short. And there's actually a comment and a question. The question I just wanted to, because we were talking during the private session about Black Lives Matter, and obviously it did damage to police reputation. And if you give a quick update on what the intent is in terms of those who got fines, because it is, I'm still being asked about it, I'm sure other people are, I'm sure you are yourself. What triggered off the second part, Chair, if you forgive me, was when you were talking about phone extraction. I know of a case. I don't want to go into the case, but I just want to give this as an example. So it's internal to the police. The professional standards asked on a specific issue of discipline that someone handed over their phone, a police officer handed over the phone, and that they would look at the section which was relevant to, which is something like 10 minutes, relevant to that case. The only point I'm making is that if you're now checking out the legal situation, I'm not asking about this specific case, but I think it's relevant that in circumstances like that, if then, because the person is expected to and may have now lost their job, that would be rectified in any of those cases where it was not used. And as I'm reading this, I think that was a misuse of, maybe not known at the time, but certainly misuse. Thank you, Chair, for letting me in.
Mark can come in on that, Gerry. I think I touched upon it in the introductory remarks, maybe it wasn't clear enough, so apologies, is that our intent is to try and remedy the fine issue. So it's complicated, but we're working with the court service to try and see if we've issued a fixed penalty which has been paid, we can resolve that and expunge the records, given the commentary from here, the Ombudsman and the PPS. So that's what we're trying to do. I would be optimistic that by September, when we come back, we can brief more fully about the answer.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Mark. Yeah, very quickly.
Just Chair. I think just to be clear, Gerry, I mean, notwithstanding the ICO report, the issue is the lawfulness of which we enter a phone. Once we're there, if there's a lawful purpose, if we find material that is criminal, even if it doesn't relate to the original inquiry, then we are duty bound to follow that, as we are in any part of our work, and that would include professional standards. So I think what the ICO report requesting is whether or not it's proportionate under any circumstances to enter the phone. And there's a difference then between seizing the phone as well for somebody who's a criminal, who's suspected of criminal offence, and then also taking phones of witnesses or victims. And the relevance then of what you're looking at for them is different to necessarily the relevance for a suspect of either a crime or even in a misconduct situation. And also just the courts have held that police officers' right to privacy is different in law because of their role in society. That is actually held in court in Scotland. So the main issue for us is whether or not under any circumstance the examination was lawful. If the examination is lawful, then if we find other material that's in there that is of criminal disciplinary nature, then our view would still be that it's proportionate and lawful for us to not ignore that and have to pursue it.
Can I pursue that for a moment? You see, it strikes me that the example I'm talking about actually is fishing. So there was nothing that was not relevant to what the phone was taken for. And the reason I'm pursuing it now is because it now looks like that police officers actually are open to their phones being fished, if that's the technical term for it. Not on legal matters, but on disciplinary matters.
Well, they're not, in my view, and any action taken professional standards has to be related to the reason for which the investigation was commenced and not just a fishing expedition just to take their phone. And even the professional standards arena, Gerry, they are quasi-legal proceedings. They are penally followed out. Everybody has full representation and so forth. So these matters, I'm not talking specifically to that case, but I'm not also setting aside what the ICO report's saying. There is relevance for all parts of our investigations on this, but I do want to sort of caution against the notion that this doesn't mean that we can't investigate a crime if we find it inside someone's phone. The question is whether or not we've gone into the phone for legitimate reasons. And then when we're there, how we retain it, how it's secured, how it's used, and then whether or not it's deleted. And there are also conflicting issues with other pieces of legislation, but I'm not in any way diminishing what the ICO has said. But we also have to be careful that we don't set aside other criminal activity whenever we're investigating matters or conduct activity.
Okay, thank you to Simon and all of the team for coming to take questions today. We appreciate it, and there's some follow-up which you will provide to that. The date of the next public meeting is Thursday, the 2nd of September, and I want to wish everyone a pleasant, hot, although only in the sense of the weather, hot summer and hopefully peaceful time as well. We've got a lot of work as a board to do over the summer, and we will continue to steam ahead with that, as I'm sure will the PSNI. So thank you to all who've joined us today, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks.